purpose of that purpose of this is that this will allow us then to post the record of this meeting, the audio or the video of this meeting online to the project website. So if you're not able to participate last night or this morning, you'd like to refer somebody to the project website, they could review the presentation at their leisure once we have that posted later this week. So that covers our kind of housekeeping rules. Like I said, we'll answer questions kind of at the tail end. So the main purpose of this morning's meeting and last night's meeting is to provide an informational overview of the proposed or drafts Glendora Station Area Vision Plan. This plan is posted online, and we are soliciting feedback and reactions and kind of commentary on this plan over the coming weeks. We're anticipating that we will close that comment period on May 9th, so just a couple weeks from now. And so the meeting is really to give you an overview of the plan, what it's about, what it says, what it's not important, which is also important, and how you can provide your best informed feedback on the plan as we kind of advance this plan forward through the process, ultimately presenting it to the Planning Commission and then to the City Council later this summer. So tonight or this morning is not a public hearing. Like I said, it's just an informational session to kind of help you understand what we presented out here and how to provide your best informed feedback on the plan. Next slide, please. And here to talk about the plan background and kind of how we started, what the goals of the plan are, I'll turn it over to Hans from City of Glendora Planning Division.
Well, thank you, Alan, and welcome everybody who's on our call today or meeting. Why create a plan? And the answer to that is Glendora finds itself at a once in a generation, probably once in a lifetime transportation opportunity with a new light rail station set to open later this year, probably in summer. The station will connect Glendora via the Metro A line to downtown Los Angeles, neighboring cities along the line, and the broader region through the expanding rail network. Really, this is probably the most significant transportation development since the 210 freeway came through the area, decades ago and, was later extended. New major transit stations are powerful catalysts for development, jobs, commercial activities, and, especially housing tend to cluster around transit-rich areas. In fact, many employers actively seek locations near transit hubs for that reason. So for residents, this also is going to open up more living options that are less car dependent. So this is truly a watershed moment for Glendora, and it's a chance, we think, to hit the ground running by creating a clear vision and articulating that vision for the area around the station and how it can grow and thrive into the future. Next slide, please. So a few notes about, how this plan came to be in funding. This planning effort was funded through an agreement with LA Metro under the Transit Oriented Communities Technical Assistance Program, or TAP. You may see that if you visit the plan online or hear us use that acronym for short. Metro partners with local jurisdictions to create and adopt plans, policies, and programs that are transit supportive, helping communities both capture the value of transit investments and increase ridership in the system. Our draft vision plan aligns closely with Metro's transit supportive toolkit, which you can see on the right, ensuring we are following best practices for transit-oriented planning. Next slide. So I think this is an important conversation to have at this point is what is the vision plan or what is a vision plan? And specific to this one or relative to this planning effort, the vision plan is an illustration of the city's aspirations, a framework outlining various development scenarios, a guide to the regulatory adjustments needed to realize those scenarios in terms of land use and zoning, and a set of goals describing how growth and development might unfold around the Glendora station over the next 20-ish or so years. The vision plan is not a rezoning. It's not a regulatory document. It is not a development project or proposal. And it's not an approval for any specific building, development, architecture, style, or project. Next slide, please. So this public engagement has been a cornerstone of this, planning effort since the inception. And, going all the way back to October of last year, we hosted an in-person community open house to introduce the vision plan alongside some of our first online survey, which the city widely promotes and promoted through its website and different social media channels. And I encourage you to follow Glendora on social media and visit the website for information on this and other things that the city is doing. We also had a presence at Glendora's last two Earth Day celebrations, which, if you've attended, are very well attended events. Unfortunately, this year's event was a little soggy, but we'll take the rain here in Southern California when we can get it. We are now hosting the second virtual open house. As Alan mentioned, there was one last night from 6 to 8, roughly, and these were both widely publicized online. Additionally, invitations were mailed to all property owners within 1/2 mile of the new station and some key business owners as well. That's in addition to the sort of online blast that we did. Finally, the complete plan will go before, after we've gotten feedback from these meetings and through this process, we'll go to Planning Commission and City Council for review, and we hope adoption in the coming months. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of an overview of the project timeline and some key milestones. We are now about 1 year into this planning process. It was designed to take roughly a year from start to finish in terms of its sort of scope and milestones for and objectives and tasks for the project. As you can see from the schedule, we're currently wrapping up the public engagement phase over the next few weeks and moving towards Planning Commission and City Council review this summer. So we're excited to be entering this final stage or stages of the project or plan. And I think with that, and encourage you to participate and visit the website and leave comments. And thank you for participating in today's meeting. And with that, I'll hand it back to Chad to continue our presentation.
Thank you, Hans. So I'll start to dive in and go into the contents of the plan. And as a reminder, at the end of the presentation, we'll provide a demonstration on how to access, view, download, and provide comments to the plan on the project website. So what's in the plan? The plan consists of 2 documents, with the main document consisting of or organized into 5 chapters. These chapters include an introduction, a vision, the development scenarios, public realm improvements, and implementation. The plan is accompanied by a series of appendices that provide the technical analysis that inform the plan. And so the study area, where is this plan located? The study area includes generally a 1/2 mile radius around the station. A 1/2 mile is used because it's about a 10 to 15-minute walk, and that's the typical amount of time or distance that one is willing to walk to a transit station. The The boundary was further refined to exclude areas that are not likely to change within this 1/2 mile radius, such as low density residential uses and recent development projects. So the study area is ultimately defined here by this darker bold black line. Some key destinations or features included in the area are shown here in the blue and red colors. You have the Glendora Village to the north, the Vaughn's Grocery Shopping Center, and the Albertsons Grocery Shopping Center. We also have the Civic Center and the post office. And then some key streets within the study are Foothill Boulevard, Route 66, Glendora Avenue, and Vermont Avenue. Okay, so the urban design concept for the plan. The urban design concept informs the vision and provides a framework for land uses in the station area. The goal of the concept is to create an attractive, diverse, and vibrant neighborhood with a mix of medium and high density residential uses within walking and biking distance to the future station. High density uses are focused just south of the station that will provide future residents with convenient transit access. Another medium density mixed use anchor is located at Foothill and Glendora Avenue to emphasize the intersection of the southern gateway to Glendora Village and the adjacent Civic Center. Activity nodes shown in the blue or cyan stars provide placemaking opportunities such as public plazas and art, while key connections shown in the white and green arrows include public realm enhancements to facilitate safe and comfortable movement to and from the station and throughout the study area. And so the urban design concept is then translated to the urban design vision or urban design illustrative. The urban design, the illustrative plan illustrates a possible pattern of development around the station. Following transit-oriented development principles, higher densities are focused adjacent to the station, while smaller scale townhome-style developments are located in other focus areas. This illustrative plan reflects potential development scenarios that support a pedestrian transit-oriented environment. This drawing does not require that these buildings be constructed on these sites, but rather suggests the possibilities the plan creates for property owners. Okay, so I just went over the vision. So I'll now go through the process of how we got here. We started with looking at case studies. So in an effort to comprehend development interest, we reviewed recent development projects around 5 nearby metro stations, including Monrovia, Duarte, Azusa, Claremont, and Montclair. The case studies focused on transit-oriented development projects, such as multifamily apartments and mixed-use buildings. And what we found typical of nearby transit-oriented development was that they tended to be 4 to 6 story wrap structures or residential units wrapping an interior parking structure. In addition to the case studies, we conducted a robust existing conditions analysis that reviewed the urban environment within the study area. Examples of analysis topics included land use, community assets, building to lot coverage, ownership, and utilization rates. The complete analysis is found in Appendix C and is downloadable on the project website. So following the existing conditions analysis, the next step was to determine which areas are best suited and most likely to accommodate new transit-oriented development. To do that, we assigned each parcel within the study area a development opportunity score. The opportunity score is a summation of points assigned to each parcel based on various criteria such as lot size, lot coverage, ownership, and vacancy. The higher the score the property receives, the more likely the property would attract transit-oriented development. So the map shown on the slide here shows parcels that scored high in the darker blue. A good example is just south of the station, where there's a cluster of dark blue parcels. Those parcels are generally larger in size. They may have low building to lot coverage and may have contiguous ownership. So this site is primed for transit-oriented development. So once we had these preliminary opportunity sites, we took this to the community and asked what development types should be encouraged and where should they go. We received a range of responses, with 3-story residential receiving the highest amount of votes, followed by 4 to 6 story mixed use. And so to recap, we conducted case studies, we reviewed existing conditions, analyzed development opportunities at the parcel level, and collected public input. This process informed the creation of development scenarios in selected focus areas. We honed in on 6 focus areas shown on the map here in the darker blue. Each focus area has a development scenarios that showcase the preferred development capacity. Now, it's important to note that as we were thinking about this, the 2021-2029 housing element identified sites within the study area that it could accommodate about 1,000 units. The development scheme for this plan summarized in the table on the bottom left accommodates various development types to achieve 1,100 units. And in a moment, we'll go through each of these 6 focus areas. So now we're back at the vision. The process leading up to the development scenarios and the urban design concept, then translated into the urban design illustrative plan, which illustrates a possible pattern of development to support a pedestrian and transit-oriented environment. And again, this drawing does not require that these buildings be constructed on these sites, but rather suggests possibilities the plan creates for property owners. And I'll now pass it back over to Alan to see if you have any questions or continue on with development scenarios.
We don't have any questions at the moment in the chat, so let's continue the presentation and we'll see if there's questions as we wrap up. We're about halfway through the presentation for those of you who are pacing yourselves. So as Chad said, we identified 6 kind of focus areas to kind of evaluate further to study the development possibilities and potentials around the future Glendora Station. And these are all detailed out with narratives in the plan document itself. So I won't go through them point by point as part of this presentation. I'll invite you to kind of read them more carefully once you can actually download the plan. But we'll go through all of them at a kind of pretty high level. But I'm going to dwell on this first one for a little bit because it is emblematic and kind of representational of kind of the approach that we took as we thought about these various sites and possibilities. So focus area A is directly south of the future station, located on the east side of Vermont Avenue, going down to Route 66. It is adjacent to, but does not include the Albertsons grocery store. This site includes, however, the site that the Metro and Gold Line Construction Authority owns. It was their kind of lay down and construction yard. They're temporarily building it out as a park and ride, kiss and ride lot, but have put it on to the market for potential affordable housing developers. Directly south of the Metro owned properties is another collection of parcels under singular ownership that has been recently put onto the real estate market. So they're anticipated to be interested buyers in that particular property. And then to the south, as you reach Route 66, at the corner, there's a car wash and some other sort of industrial and kind of commercial uses. So we think this entire cluster of properties, many of which are under singular ownership, represents kind of one of the biggest opportunities for development adjacent to the train station. As we looked at this, however, one of the things that was really important as we thought about this is that we think about building a neighborhood here of individual buildings of different scales and not one gargantuan project. So one of the key ideas you can see in the 3D illustration in the upper right is that we've proposed part of this cluster of development that developers would introduce east-west streets or pedestrian passages leading east from Vermont Avenue and potentially going to the south side of the train station for additional access from this area to the train station itself. So key idea is to break this large site up into kind of smaller scale blocks, more akin to Glendora Village, not one large super site. The other thing, as you can see in the illustration, is that the cluster of boxes and red and kind of oranges and yellows are different sizes and different scales. So there are some sites that are going to be quite large here that will enable or kind of permit fairly large footprint buildings that could have pretty significant density relative to things surrounding them. So these are looking at maybe potentially 4 to 6 story buildings. Could be similar to Avalon development or some of the other developments that have been seen like in Monrovia and Duarte. But one of the key ideas we kind of proposed is that these developments would only occur where they're particularly close to the railroad tracks and pushed back from kind of the surrounding residential neighborhoods in particular. The other thing you see here is labeled A2 on the diagram, and these are smaller scale buildings. So here we're proposing that there's some of the smaller lots that are part of this cluster of properties that's an appropriate place for 3-story townhome development or 3-story walk-up apartments, which is what you see today. has been built directly north of the train station. Is kind of current development of that scale. So part of the idea we're looking at here is to think it's not a one size fits all. It's not one transit-oriented development in Glendora does not mean only large-scale 5-story buildings. It's a mix of different building types that are scaled appropriately to the context and the size of properties. So if we click to the next slide, can illustrate on focus area B, which is the west side of Vermont, another kind of key idea that informed our thinking as we looked at these different sites. So again, this is the west side of Vermont, and here you see 4 separate structures. These are drawn out as 3-story apartments with a mix of tuck under parking and surface parking lots. Again, there are a lot of good precedents for this in Glendora and elsewhere along the foothill extension of the Metro rail line. So this is a prototype that makes economic sense in the San Gabriel Valley. But these 4 individual buildings are actually aligned with individual parcels and ownership. So another key idea as we looked at these sites is that we thought we should respect existing ownership patterns of the land as best we know them through data we have from county assessors. So that we're not presuming that some master developer has to swoop in and acquire 4 or 5 properties in order to build out the vision plan. This is intended to really enable a kind of incremental development as individual property owners see opportunity and have the interest in reinvesting in their property. So you could imagine that this collection of 4 buildings builds out this particular way. It might potentially be only 1 or 2 of those buildings built out because meanwhile, the other property owners are content with the uses and the structures they have on their property and have no interest in reinvesting at this time or in the near future. This site also is important because the west side of Vermont, the sites on the west side of the Vermont do back up to a single family or largely single family neighborhood. So another key idea here is that, really we don't want to see anything higher than 3 stories in these areas, and we want the bulk of these buildings pushed towards Vermont so that we're not having adverse impacts on the adjacent residential neighborhood that exists. Let's go to the next slide. Focus area C is a collection of properties. It's really 2 properties that is really kind of critical in our mind. This is located at the southwest corner of Glendora Avenue and Foothill Boulevard. So it's on the one hand directly across the street from City Hall and the library, the Civic Center complex. It's also at the very south end of Glendora Village. So we think this is a site that has kind of an incredible opportunity to provide a kind of commercial anchor to the village at the south end, potentially with a building that could accommodate like a drugstore or kind of a small grocery store, or maybe some sort of entertainment venue, something of that scale. Commercial-wise, we think it's a real opportunity for the village. So we've drawn up a building that 3 to 4 story residential building with ground floor commercial uses that could accommodate that scale of commercial activity. The other key idea we think is important as part of it, if a development does occur on this site, is that there's some real placemaking or kind of architectural kind of gesture to the village. And so you can see we drew this somewhat crudely in the model as this kind of like little tower directly left of the label. It says Foothill Boulevard. So you can imagine that being maybe like a clock tower of some kind, or some sort of architectural feature that sort of marks the south end of the Glendora Village. And that at the foot of that would be some sort of public plaza with maybe a fountain or public artwork or outdoor dining of some kind. So there's a real opportunity with this site to provide a kind of like an amenity to the village and help pull commercial activity from the village just a little bit south of Foothill Boulevard. Just really kind of tie things together. We've also imagined on this then a collection of other kind of like apartment structures to the south on Glendora Avenue and down Vermont. So there's a kind of mix of different building types and scale here. I should say the other thing in thinking about different kinds of building types, apartments, townhomes, walk-up apartments, etc., is that this also diversifies the kind of range of housing options that would be available as part of the station area plan. So it can accommodate people and families at different stages of their life, whether they're young professionals, living with roommates or just young couples without kids or young families with kids or empty nesters and everything in between is a possibility. So we really, again, one size fits all is not the approach. We think we need to have a diversity of housing types, housing scales, accommodate a range of different individuals and their life cycle. Let's go to the next one. So focus area D, we actually did 2 studies for this because there's some really kind of different possibilities here. This site is located on Foothill Boulevard, west of the village, but directly south of the Vaughn's Shopping Center, and backs up to the Metro right-of-way, and in particular, where the Metro right-of-way begins to climb for the flyover bridge that goes over the intersection of Foothill and Grand Avenue. There's a fairly large piece of property, mostly industrial uses, light industrial uses, that backs up to the Metro right-of-way. And so there is a possibility to build potentially quite a bit of residential development here, depending on the kind of scale of it. Again, backing up to the train flyover, so somewhat limited impacts on surrounding neighborhoods. So the first scenario we looked at respects the existing ownership patterns and builds this out as a kind of cluster of 3-story townhomes, 3-story apartments of different scales and varieties. So you can see it's a potentially a very interesting sort of neighborhood, largely composed of kind of like walk-up townhomes that are pretty similar and seen elsewhere in Glendora and the region. The next scenario that we looked at imagines that all these properties potentially get consolidated, at which point then the possibility for a much larger scale development becomes a possibility, and potentially with ground floor retail facing out onto Foothill Boulevard. So really different kind of scenarios, really kind of, again, dependent on kind of ultimate ownership of the property. And in this particular case, ultimately, because the property would need to be rezoned in order to accommodate residential, a bit really dependent on kind of ultimately the city's vision of how this property could participate in the overall station area strategy. Move to the next one. 2 more to go. Focus area E is a relatively small site at the very north end of Glendora Village, Glendora Avenue and Bennett, as you can see. So this site, we imagined a 3-story mixed-use structure, mostly residential, with, you can see, parking accessed off an alley. And that red piece there at the bottom, that indicates ground floor commercial that would extend the experience of kind of retail, restaurant, commercial activities at Glendora Village all the way up to Bennett. Next scenario and the last one is focus area F, which is located on Route 66 east of Glendora Avenue. And these are on the south side. These are some interesting sites. The ownership pattern here is quite fragmented. So there's not one single owner, but multiple owners of a variety of sites, most of which are fairly narrow and fairly deep. There's no alley access, so vehicular access would all come off of Route 66. So again, operating under kind of strategy that we're respecting ownership patterns, we've tried to draw out buildings that could be built on existing ownerships. So that kind of lends this to being a collection of the 3-story townhomes, 3-story apartments, different varieties. Really not feasible to get anything else scale on those sites. Another aspect of the vision plan is that we've looked at the idea that there probably should be some public street improvements or kind of standards that the city should entertain as part of approving new projects. There are already a number of public street improvements that have been planned and financed and will be starting construction, are related to anticipating the Metro station opening. But we've looked at a couple more. So one of the first is sort of introduced at the very beginning about the sites directly south of the train station, where we think there should be new roads or pedestrian passages, break up that very large site into something that resembles a neighborhood. So the plan provides some suggestions about what those streets ought to look like, the scale of them. We also think Vermont, particularly south of Ada and the train station down to Route 66, needs some attention as new residential development potentially starts to fill up that street, providing street trees and sidewalks, et cetera. Pedestrian amenities would be really critical to ensuring that people who do move into potential new developments are really encouraged to walk up to the train station So to get some ideas for how that street should improve. And then lastly, we think that Foothill Boulevard west of the village deserves some attention, particularly if this sort of large site that we identified earlier becomes part of the equation and new residential is proposed south of the Vaughn's Shopping Center. We really think that improvements on Vermont are critical to bring people, help people, encourage them to walk from that area to the village and really kind of tie the village to that sort of West Foothill Boulevard extension, if you will. Move to the next. So lastly, the plan discusses implementation. The plan itself, the vision plan itself, is not a blueprint or is not a rezoning or regulatory plan. It describes, as Hans said, an aspirational vision, but then describes the necessary, some of the regulatory ideas or kind of concepts that would need to be enacted by the city through future legislation in order to make the plan actually come to fruition. So there's two kind of components to this. Next slide. The first, and both of these relate to kind of the regulation of the land itself, which is the city's sort of authority. So the first is the general plan land use map. The land use map is the city's kind of constitutional blueprint for how it thinks about allowable uses on individual parcels across the entire city. So there's essentially single family zoning, multifamily zoning, industrial zoning, commercial land use districts embedded into the general plan. But what there is not is a mixed use land use designation or a mixed use transit oriented land use designation under the current general plan. So we're proposing that the city would ultimately, as part of the future general plan update, enact these two designations. So you can see on the proposed map, we're suggesting the transit-oriented district would be the large parcel, including Albertsons directly south of the train station, and then other parcels that we've identified in focus area studies would be part of this mixed-use corridor designation we've drafted. Go to the next slide. Where the rubber meets the road for most property owners and the city planning staff is the zoning. Zoning is the tool that implements the general plan. So the general plan is inherently general. Zoning gets very specific in terms of what specific allowed uses are permitted on properties and whether those are permitted outright or whether they require conditional use permits. What are the setbacks required for development, the height restrictions, et cetera. You know, the real nitty-gritty detail of what can be built on properties is done through zoning. So we're following the general plan blueprint and our recommended zoning here. But we're suggesting more options. So you can see there's 4 categories that we're recommending here. Mixed use zones 1, 2, and 3, and then a transit mixed use zone that generally correspond to the land use designations in the previous map, but again, having more nuance. So a couple of ideas that are inherent in this. First is that the mixed use zone 1 would have the same commercial uses as C1. So you can imagine a C1 lot being redesignated as a mixed use 1 lot. Commercial uses that operate on that lot would continue to operate as they have been. No changes would really impact them at all. But mixed use 2 and mixed use 3, we're suggesting there might be a kind of increase in density as the properties get larger. So it's on the one hand, an incentive for properties, smaller properties to be consolidated, because as you acquire more properties, and you can see is potentially get over 1 acre or an acre and a half, the allowable height and density potentially could increase. But the other recognition there is as the lots get larger, there's more flexibility for a designer to accommodate that density and kind of push it around and you know, be more creative about how they sort of position that density and that height, be sensitive to the surrounding context and surrounding neighborhood. So the larger the site is, the more flexibility inherent in the kind of overall design. So both the land use map suggestion and the zone changes are recommendations to the city. The adoption of the vision plan would not enact these zoning changes. That would all have to be done through future studies and kind of detailed analysis and outreach by the city. But we're providing a roadmap for how the city might think about these and future actions as part of the vision plan. So let's go to the last slide here, and then I'll turn it over to Chad, who can provide an overview of the project website. So that's a kind of quick overview of what the vision plan says. As I said, we are accommodating public comment through May 9th at this point. And we're really encouraging people to do that through the website, which, as I said, Chad will demonstrate. And then anticipating that following that public input and kind of revisions to the plan as appropriate, we'll be presenting the vision plan to the Planning Commission and ultimately to the City Council later this summer. At this point, given schedules, it would certainly be no sooner than June, potentially going into July, August, or later in the summer. Potentially going into September, depending on the schedules of those two bodies. So I see we have a couple of questions in the chat so far. We will respond to those after Chad shows you how to download the plan through the station, through the website, how to provide comment directly through the website.
All right, thank you, Alan. So I'll demonstrate how to, as Alan just mentioned, how to download, view, and comment the plan. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to the project website, which is GlendoraStationPlan.com. And I'll go ahead and copy paste that into the chat. And there's a few ways you can access the plan. When you hit the home page, right at the forefront, there's a how to participate box. And then the second box will say review the draft station area vision plan. And when you go ahead and click that text there, it will take you to the page and scroll you down to the plan. The alternative way to get there is back at the home page. There's another menu item at the menu header bar here that says review the plan, and you'll click that button. It'll take you to the review the plan page, and then you go ahead and scroll down, and you'll see the plan here embedded into the web page. In this built-in viewer here. To turn the page, there's this arrow, and you go ahead and click that, and you'll see the pages start to turn. You can zoom in with the plus slider here and click and drag if you want to zoom into certain pages. And then to make full screen, there's an icon at the bottom right of the viewer to make it full screen, and then you can do the same actions as well. And now to download the plan, right built into the viewer, there's another icon in the bottom right that looks like an arrow pointing down to a line. And you can click that and you can download the plan. Or if you scroll down a little bit further, there are download links highlighted here. The first link will allow you to download the plan as a PDF. And the second link will allow you to download the appendices as a PDF. So three ways to download. Another note is that both documents, the main vision plan and the appendices, are intended to be viewed as a 2-page spread. So in the viewer here, if you might be looking on your phone or your tablet, you would recommend you have you view it in landscape mode, and it will automatically convert to a 2-page spread. And the same thing with your PDF viewer. Make sure that it's in a 2-page spread with the front cover and back cover. Okay, so you have access to the plan. How do you comment? So on the same page, you scroll down a little bit further, and there's a comment form. And now you can comment as many comments as you like, one at a time. The first question, the first form asks, what are you commenting on? So you can refer to a topic, a general, if you have a general comment, a page number, a section, a certain figure, you can write that here. So I'll start to, do an example, and I'm going to put a general comment. And the next box is your actual comment. So this is my comment. And then optionally, you can add your name and email if you'd like to provide that. If you want to be contacted, if you have any other general questions as well, you can add them to the first 2 boxes. And then when you add your name and email, that will give us an option to respond if needed. I put my name here and leave my email optional. And so as I mentioned, you can submit as many as you like. And so when you press, once you have your comment ready, you'll press submit. It'll then take you to a confirmation page and it says, thank you. Your response was submitted successfully. And then there's a press here to submit another response. So I'll go ahead and click the highlighted here. And then the form will reset to allow you to submit additional comments. So if you have comments on another page, another general comment, another question, etc. I also wanted to mention the city's website. So say you don't want to leave your email or you don't have any comments. If you go to the city's website, which is the cityofglendora.gov, and I'll go ahead and copy that in the chat as well. And then you scroll down, you can go to meetings and agendas. And I'll scroll down this page, and then you could then insert your email address and press notify me, and then you can filter which type of notifications you want to get. For this project, you likely be most interested in the planning commission meetings and the city council meetings. You'll review the agenda items and can see if the Glendora Station area plan is on that agenda. So that's just another way for you to stay in touch and follow the project and the plan. All right. So let me go back to the slideshow here. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to the question and comments portion. So we have a few questions in the chat. And I'll go ahead and ask the first question. So the first question is Metro planning on selling the new parking lot? If so, where will commuters be able to park their cars? There's a concern that adjacent single-family neighborhoods will be used as overflow parking if new lot is sold.
Yeah, I'll try and answer this one. So what we know is that Metro, as I said, is part of their development of their rail plans and their rail lines, acquires adjacent lots that they use in turn for staging and construction, and then eventually builds parking lots, really intended to be interim lots. Metro then subsequently ends up releasing these parcels or these properties to interested developers who potentially would develop those properties with housing. Metro has a policy that requires that their properties be developed with affordable housing. So that release goes out, mostly affordable housing developers would be the parties that would be interested in those lots. Earlier, within the past 12 months, Metro released about 30 properties across the entire system to interested developers from Santa Monica down into the South Bay, and it included the Glendora property. So Metro is actively soliciting developer interest on that particular property. At this point in time, we haven't seen any solid plans from any particular developers, so we don't know kind of where that stands. Those property negotiations would be conducted between the developers and Metro. And so at this point, we don't know kind of where that negotiation stands or whether they even have interested developers. Relative to parking that would potentially be lost, two things to be said on that. One, it's possible that Metro would require that parking to be replaced as part of any land agreement. That sometimes has been the case with other properties they acquire, that they do require the developer to replace the commuter parking as part of the new development. That again is a sort of negotiation that Metro would have to conduct with an interested developer. Relative to the potential for overflow parking in the surrounding neighborhoods, it's a very good concern, and certainly one that other cities have been worried about. So we have suggested in the plan and in the implementation section that the city closely monitor on-street parking in the immediate area of the train station and in the surrounding neighborhoods to really understand whether there is an overflow parking problem that potential commuters are parking in surrounding neighborhoods. And that the city would probably need to conduct fairly regular parking surveys to really understand and have data in hand to understand if that is really in fact an issue, and then be able to entertain potential solutions to that problem. One of which could be preferential parking districts in adjoining neighborhoods. So if you're a resident, you're able to get a pass to park in your neighborhood. Those kinds of programs are not often popular with residents. They're kind of, a bit of an administrative headache, both for residents and for the city. So we're recommending that the city really have data in hand before they propose that as a kind of ultimate solution. Really understand it. Is there in fact an overflow parking problem? So it's a legitimate concern, and we have tried to address it as part of the implementation strategies and the things the city should be paying attention to as these developments in the train station come online.
Thank you, Alan. All right, I'll move on to the next question. Do you have estimates for the maximum number of units that could be built? Any corresponding estimates for the total number of residents the units would accommodate?
Yeah, I think I can answer that one. And I think this is kind of an interesting thought experiment. So this is both this is a theoretical plan as a vision plan. Theoretical and realistic maximums are going to be two different things. Glendora's housing element, and we have an adopted and certified by the state housing element, calls for the city to plan for, facilitate, and through planning create or provide the ability to create, around 1,300 dwelling units at different affordability levels at one of several sites, housing sites within this 1/2 mile area around transit that we've looked at and discussed. The city also has so that's about 1/2 of our total housing commitment to the state, which is about 2,400 units. So it is concentrated in this area. The city also has a regulatory floor of 80% of that maximum density be created. So if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I want to develop site X in this area, and it's a housing site," and we saw the zoning recommendation slide, and let's say our density per acre is 40, then 80% of that, and in much cases now it's 30, so 80% of that would be 24, or whatever 80% of 40 is, 32, I think. That would be the minimum density that we could approve a project for in that area. So when you kind of think of all these things, that 80% number is going to be around 1,000 theoretical units. So again, that's hypothetical. Really, the central question running through the entire vision plan, I think, is how to best accommodate that number of 1,000 units in this 1/2 mile area, in which scenarios. We've looked at the different scenarios of how that might happen. The second part of the question, I think, was like the number of people that could be. Glendora's average household size is around 3 folks per unit, but it's going to be less in multifamily development than in single family type development. So I think if you run 1,000 times 2.5, it's probably a pretty good estimate. You're going to end up with around 2,500 people potentially in this area over the next 20 years. But again, that's at that theoretical build out of around 1,000 units. Will it be that? Will it be something less than that? That's going to be hard to say and to be determined as we sort of move forward with our next general plan update and zoning implementation of this vision that we've created. So I think that answers question 2 as best as I can answer it.
Thank you, Hans. Okay, next question. Where is the threshold of change where land value must exceed building value in order for change to take place? Will there be any practical economic discussions, real world examples presented to city council and staff? For example, will the density proposed on the west side of Vermont be sufficient to acquire the sites?
I'll kind of speak to this a little bit, I think. if I can. So one of the things we did that's in the appendix of the existing conditions analysis is that lays out the kind of the methodology that we employed to identify the ultimately the focus areas where we drew up these different scenarios. And so Chad in his presentation kind of glossed over with one slide what amounted to probably about 5 different kind of metrics we used to evaluate properties, whether it was lot size, lot frontage, common ownership, historic structures on the site, etc. So all of those different metrics are mapped and detailed out and form this kind of this point scale that Chad I described earlier. Um, so you can go back and evaluate, kind of assess all those kinds of metrics that we employed. They're all tied to kind of data that is driven from the parcel itself, not necessarily subjective data. It's not based on us driving by and sort of thinking that property like looks like it's ready to fall down, so therefore it's a site. It's really tied to data we have from the site. One of the factors in this analysis is the county assessor's assessment of land value versus the value of improvements. So that is a factor that we took into account as we identified the sites. This is, really intended to identify sites that have the highest relative probability of reinvestment compared to others in the plan area. As I said, it's not to say that those sites can or should be redeveloped or that the economics of what happens on those sites today would make sense for someone to acquire that site and redevelop it in some fashion. So those kinds of discussions about whether an individual site, whether the economics of an individual site makes sense for a outside developer to acquire that and develop it and kind of displace or buy out whatever business or property owner is there today. That has not been part of our study. We've really focused on this kind of like site analysis that's based on data that's publicly accessible or derived from the sites themselves to kind of arrive at these kind of conclusions. So what we know, and is also part of the background analysis, is that the scale of developments that we've modeled, you do see, or we see elsewhere on the foothill extension, whether it's from Montclair all the way out to Azusa and going into Monrovia, the kinds of developments, footprints that we've drawn up in the scenarios is very consistent with what is being built elsewhere around other foothill stations and future stations. So the general economics of that makes sense. There is a discussion about economics and the kind of relative value of rents in Glendora versus some of the other stations, a kind of high-level summary of economics that if you're interested, you can kind of look into. Generally looks pretty favorable for development within the city of Glendora at the scales that we've imagined. But hard-nosed looking at individual properties, that's not been part of our scope.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, move on to the next question. Do you have an infrastructure streetscape plan for the main streets involved, like Glendora Avenue and Foothill? If so, is there any last mile funding to accomplish this plan, or is this not part of your scope of work?
I'll take that one, and that's a great question. So a couple of things. So as far as our vision plan goes, it's predominantly a land use plan, but it does acknowledge and recognize some other public improvements and other planning efforts that the city's done that are going to be more specific to sort of the transportation infrastructure in this, half mile, or sometimes we say first and last mile in planning area. And that's really that area within about a mile of a major transit stop. So the city has something, and I know Chad's pulling it up now, a planning effort, and this is from the transportation division, so the public works side of the house. I'm in planning, called the People Movement Project. And the People Movement Project is a plan to create about 10 miles of safe, accessible bike lanes and pedestrian routes around Glendora. And it kind of has like two main parts. There's an urban trail system. And yeah, we've got some slides here and stuff to pull up here. And, about 8 miles of off-street bike lanes, things like that are, connecting downtown and the transit station and neighborhoods and recreational sites. And then also first and last mile, roadway improvements around the metro station, to make walking, biking, and hopefully driving all modalities easier. And these include bike lanes, curb extensions, a Dutch intersection. I think we just saw a picture of that somewhere. It's kind of a roundabout type idea. And this project supports environmental and economic goals and the land use goals of this plan. They go together to promote walking and biking and alternatives to automobile transportation. That is part of our capital improvement plan for the city. So there is funding to do that stuff. The city is working on that. And so that's the extent that I can kind of speak to that. So you're welcome. I would encourage folks to look at our website on the transportation page, and Chad has it up now. And I think I can put the link to it in the chat. There we go. So everybody can see that. And there's, a summary there that, I was talking off of a little bit, but there's the whole plan in council presentations and everything are up there as attachments. So I encourage you to look at that in addition. And that goes well, I think, with this vision plan as well. I see them kind of going hand in hand. This talks mostly about the land use. That talks mostly about the transportation improvements in the area.
Yeah, I will note that the station area vision plan in the public kind of improvement section does have kind of conceptual street sections that would be proposed in terms of lane assignments, bike lanes, et cetera, for the, in particular for Vermont and the proposed east-west streets that might be part of new development south of the station, as well as for Foothill Boulevard. So those conceptual streetscapes have been illustrated in the vision plan. So there's some direction for the city to take with future public works improvements and discussions. And relative to the kind of next question that's been posed, has there been any public workshops on streetscapes, or will there be? I think that probably would be if the city was to follow through with the recommendations of the plan in terms of these public street improvements. These are pretty conceptual. City would have to do a more detailed engineering studies and kind of analysis and kind of cost estimating and all the kind of process that has been done with the existing first mile, last mile improvements. You're switching hosts in case computer that's about to kind of die off. So, but we don't have any further questions.
There's one more question in the chat here. Has
I
there
think I
been?
answered that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alan just got that one about the public workshops. Yeah, there'll be